Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. So this was it's meant to be a quick video. We'll see how quick it ends up being. I am trying to work on another video. I don't want to say too much about it in case I don't get around to it, or it could take a very long time to do. We'll see. But I just wanted to make this video real quick and share this with the world because I found this really interesting. A Republican conservative member of my family decided, and they like to do this, they like to send me articles about various things, but they sent me a newspaper clipping and said that this is a really interesting read here from the Epoch Times. This one is about the Chinese Communist Party has entered a state of collapse, and I would put like a screenshot of this, but for a video that's supposed to be quick and simple, I not like with the nerve damage and everything, I'm not going to go through scanning it in and everything. So this is not something I that was pulled off the internet. It's probably available on the internet. I don't know. I haven't looked, so I have the paper copy. But it says in it, as 2026 starts, humanity is on the brink of a pivotal year. History rarely provides such clarity, a moment when right and wrong are distinctly clear. Truth and falsehood are unmistakable. Well, I would beg to differ with that. It's really interesting that the rise of right-wing media, which really gained a foothold in around 2015 through 2017 with the whole anti-SJW movement, which, people who made anti-SJW content either went one of two ways. You had those that completely retracted and realized, oh wait, this is doing harm. I was unknowingly in a very bad way and should have been more aware that I was making right-wing propaganda that was pushing people to the right, and went completely left-wing and started going against that grain, that narrative, and going against what was essentially propaganda, giant strawmans that I think a lot of creators who were making anti-SJW content didn't realize that the things that they were talking about were strawman representations of the positions they were going against. And the other way was the anti-SJW creators sort of pulled the mask off. A lot of them would say, oh, I am a leftist, I am liberal, but then they would do nothing but criticize the left and criticize liberal philosophies. And so they've pulled their masks off, and many of them were not moderately right-wing. Many of them were far right, like far right, like National Socialist, sort of ethno-nationalists, some of them. But what was really interesting, you look at right-wing creators like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, they talk a lot about postmodernism, which is this idea that in the postmodern era, people will use a fantasy. They'll use falsehoods, fantasies, and readjust their understandings of descriptive reality to fit the narrative of the fantasy, the falsehood that they want. And a lot of the right-wing pundits accuse the left of doing that. And in all actuality, it would seem that the right wing is more guilty of postmodernism, which it's been argued that Trump is the first postmodernist president to take office, at least here in the United States. I'm not sure about other countries, but it is very true, because with the right wing, a lot of the times, take the Bible, for example, in traditional sense of biblical text, is that whenever there's something that challenges the worldview or puts the something that can't be, like something that's fact, that makes it to where the worldview circulating around biblical text, it causes the people who have the worldview of a religious worldview, it causes their worldview to collapse, because the descriptive reality, the actual reality, is in friction, contradictory to the worldview that religion provides them. So instead of accepting that fact, that descriptive reality is showing that the worldview around these right-wing philosophies, the fact is that they're actually wrong, and the entire philosophy collapses because of fact, because of descriptive reality. What they'll do is they'll try to reshape facts, or have bias, or just completely ignore facts and sort of choose your own adventure and what they think reality is, to explain reality, because the facts that are coming out don't fit with the narrative of the conservative, traditional, religious sort of thing, which means they would be the postmodernists. The Earth can't be more than 10,000 years old. What would it be at this point? Like 15,000 years old? It can't be. So they have to create a fantasy where people lived along dinosaurs, and you get the creationists and stuff, and you have people who are denying the reality that in biology, turns out sex is not binary, because you have you have male, you have female in biological sex, and then you have intersex conditions. You could try to get around this by saying, well, by being very, very precise in linguistically precise, definitionally precise, by saying, well, intersex are conditions that affect the two sexes. But the moment you say there's male, there's female, and then there's intersex, there's a third category, definitionally, you can't say that biological sex is binary at that point, because there's male, there's female, and something else. So it's binary and until it isn't. It doesn't matter what percentage of the population, maybe a very small percent that's intersex, but that still means definitionally biologists run into a problem that the definition of saying that biological sex is binary doesn't fit, because it doesn't work with the natural observable world that we see. And conservatives really struggle with that. It means that their worldview and understanding that, and not just biological sex, but gender now gets slotted into the category of sociology. It's a sociological phenomenon, man-made creation of man, masculine, and she, feminine, in presentation of between masculine and femininity in presentation of how one is. So that this is where, gender becomes a social construct and how one presents, and it shifts through time and cultures and things like that. And, like makeup, for example, is now thought to be something that of a woman does. However, when makeup first came out, it was something that men used as well. And it's just that there are different masculinities, there are different femininities, there are different ways of expressing oneself. People who are biologically male do not always present as feminine, and people who are biologically female do not always. Wait. I think I got that backwards. People who are born biologically male do not always present masculine. People who are biologically born female do not always present feminine. And there's these sort of mixtures of things. And the conservatives, the traditionals, they really struggle with this. They don't want that to be the case. The worldview is that there's man, there's woman, there's male, there's female, and that's it. Period. But that's not what descriptive reality shows us. And then as we look through history and back in time, we realize this may have never been the case, is that there's always been this sort of spectrum of expression between masculinity and femininity, and how some individuals approach that. And I mean, that's just descriptive reality. So, and instead of facing that fact, that descriptive reality, they sort of have to rewrite reality because the challenge to their worldview would collapse. It's sort of the same issue we see with people who still think and believe that being gay is a choice. And this is something, if anyone's being intellectually honest, you ask, well, did you make the choice to be straight? Is being straight, being, like, let's say I'm talking to a man, a cishet man, being attracted to women, is that voluntary? And if they're being intellectually honest, the answer is, well, of course not. They couldn't make the decision. They couldn't decide to go and make out with another guy and enjoy it. You can't choose to enjoy that. You can't choose to be aroused by that. You can't choose to get the butterflies in the stomach, the sweaty palms, feel inhalation and attraction and all that. There is also the possibility that some of these people are bisexual and think that everyone feels this way. Everyone has attractions towards both. And not realize that, no, not everyone does. There are people that are strictly heterosexual. They're only attracted to women. They do not find the opposite to be attractive. As well as gay people. There are people who are strictly gay. They are strictly attracted to the same sex or gender as themselves. And that's something that's attraction is generally understood, if you're being intellectually honest. I don't know how you could see it any other way, to be involuntary. This is not something we have cognitive control over. We don't sit around and decide who we're attracted to. We either are or we aren't. I think there are varying levels of attraction. There's like, whoa, really, really hot, really cute, or, like, yeah, they're okay. And then, of course, like, no. But because that would cause their worldview of homosexuality or being gay, being choice, to collapse, they end up defending a falsehood. They almost have to believe it's protecting a falsehood, a fantasy ideology, is more important to them than the actual facts and of the reality we live in, the descriptive reality. So they're engaging more in postmodernism than I would say the left is. And maybe the left does participate in some forms of postmodernism, but I personally think that we should predicate our ideas on as close to truth and fact as we possibly can. So, but anyway. So falsehoods are unmistakable and decisions are unavoidable with irreversible consequences. Today, we are not commemorating an organization or a movement. We are honoring something far greater, the survival of human consciousness. Conscience, sorry. 456 million conscientious have already chosen. By the end of 2025, more than 456 million Chinese individuals using either their real names or aliases have publicly declared their withdrawal from the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. Its Youth League and Young Pioneers organizations. At the same time, more than 5.12 million people worldwide, representing diverse cultures and faiths, have signed the global petition calling for an end to the CCP. The number of people who signed the petition is not merely a statistic. It represents the clearest moral verdict of our time. Now, when I was reading this, and I want to be clear, like, there are things that I can look at and say, well, objectively, China is doing well. They are operating on a surplus, not a deficit. Like, America is now sitting here with trillions of dollars, the biggest deficit the United States has ever seen, because Trump is blowing it out of the water with very, very, very bad decision-making and very, very bad leadership and a very, very corrupt, bad administration. And if you don't see that, I really think, again, it goes back to the postmodernist thing. Instead of looking at Trump's administration objectively, they're having to twist and contort themselves mentally into pretzels to try to defend their worldview of right-wing policies and politics, and they can't even understand or even entertain the idea that even from a capitalist and traditionalist perspective, that the things that he's doing is causing harm to the United States. It's broken the military grid around the United States. It's, like, I saw some debater with Dean Withers the other day who was saying that Trump is handling the Iran situation well. And the thing is Trump started that. It wasn't a thing until he began it. So it's something that didn't need to occur at all. But before I even started researching the Epoch Times, and I did start doing it, because already at the point that we're reading, I noticed something interesting. So not only is China working off of a surplus instead of a deficit in their GDP, they don't have a national debt. They have a national surplus. They're also advancing us technologically far beyond our reach, and a lot of that has to do with handing over our NASA budget over to SpaceX and Elon Musk, who honestly, if you look at there are uh, people like nuclear physicists and rocket engineers that have been sort of sounding the bell on this for a long time, and people have really not been paying attention because they want to be able to go to Mars. They want these things to happen, and instead of looking at reality, they're chasing the dream. And it, according to physicists, this is just not possible. What Elon Musk is trying to do, it breaks the laws of physics and nature. It's not physically possible according to the rules and laws of nature and physics. And every time one of his rockets blow up, that's literally $30 million of taxpayer money that just went boom.
Their new updated version of Starship, not so much. For me, it's all just kind of dumb. You know, I raced with China. Well, this is peak contrived urgency in that, well, America did kind of land on the moon some 50 years ago. And so declaring a race when you're all but guaranteed to lose is just kind of dumb. But likewise, America's claims that they want to do more than flags and footprints, also kind of dumb, in that they want people on the moon to do some pretty useless science experiments. Two of the three main Artemis science goals and the instruments deal with understanding the moon itself. The Lunar Environmental Monitoring Station is a compact, autonomous, blah 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 seismometer. Don't need a human for that. While the Lunar Dielectric Analyzer will aid in understanding the character and origin of lunar polar volatiles. Again, don't need a human for that. The third main science objective will investigate how to mitigate the risks of human exploration. And to that end, the Lunar Effect on Agricultural Flora instrument will investigate the lunar surface's environment's effects on space crops and see if lunar regolith can be used to grow food. Again, you don't need a human for that either.
But China's actually been realistic in their space programs. Are actually they've got technologies for space to send things to various planets and collect data and stuff. We don't need people there to collect data and information. There's no reason to do that when it's much cheaper to send a rover or a machine to collect data and information that we need. But they are now becoming the leading market on the global stage for many, many things. This is why Trump's tariffs are actually helping China, because all these countries that are getting hit with Trump's tariffs and being penalized by the Trump administration, they don't need to do trade with us. They don't need our products. They don't need our resources, because they can just go to China. They can go to other countries. This might have worked back in the 1930s or 1940s, because the world wars destroyed a lot of the domestic products of many countries, and many countries were in the process of rebuilding, not just economically, but also rebuilding as far as infrastructure goes. And the United States was largely unaffected, so we had access to a lot of resource, which included farming and meat produce that a lot of countries didn't have access to, because they had been horribly ravaged by war. And so that might have worked back then when they couldn't go to other countries to get these resources. But now, we've just thrown all that in the trash, because now they can just go to other countries. They don't need to get their oil from us. They can go to other countries to get it. They don't need produce from us. They can go to China to get it. So there are things that China is doing really, really, really well, and they are becoming basically, we were kind of at an even level with them in the global market, but that's been undone because of Trump. So, honestly, Xi Jinping really doesn't care what Trump is doing, because the things that Trump is doing is basically like sawing America's foot off, going like, I'm going to teach you a lesson. And Xi Jinping's like, okay, because all these things that we're doing is helping their economy out, because all these countries are going to them for things like garlic and onions and corn and wheat and meat products and all kinds of stuff. We're not needed, and if we're going to be assholes, then why participate with a country that's going to be an asshole when they can go to another country that's far more reasonable in making deals and bargains and stuff on the global stage. That doesn't mean I don't have critiques of China. Like, China is basically a massive surveillance state. That's not something I appreciate. China does not really observe or appreciate democracy. That's not something I'm in favor of. China allows for slave labor, which is not something I'm in favor of, but to be fair, so does the United States. We still have slavery here in the United States, where we force inmates to work for free as a form of punishment, which is just slavery and rationalizing it. But there are things that I do criticize China, and reasons why I would not want to live there. They're beating us in green energy, green technology, that like with their mag trains, bullet trains, and what have you. And there are aspects, like what they did with the Uyghurs is not something I find something that we should be condoning. They're not very good on LGBTQIA plus rights or equality or civil rights in general. So I have critiques of China, but it would just be dishonest not to recognize where China is doing well. And when it comes to industry and their presence on the global stage in the global market, they're doing better than us now because we shot ourselves in the foot. But within that first paragraph, I noticed something very interesting. First of all, it's economists are not in disagreement about China outpacing us economically in sourcing their domestic products and shipping their products over the world. They're beating us. That's not something that is disputed amongst economists. Economically, they're doing really well. Them operating on a surplus instead of a deficit is not something that economists disagree about, regardless of that economist's political leanings. There are left-wing economists that will say this, centrist economists that will say this, right-wing economists are even saying this. And I have tons of stuff in the description for that. So you can peruse through that. I'm not going to go through these economists and the things that they're saying about the Chinese economy, but it's not disputed amongst economists. China's economy is doing really, really well. And you don't have to go to a leftist economist to know that. You can go to a right-wing economist and find that same information. And that's provided. It'll be in the description. I'll leave tons of links to Richard Wolff, who's a leftist economist. But I did, gather some right-wing and more libertarian and centrist economists that also agree with this. It's just objective fact. It's just the truth. Their economy is doing really well. But the other thing that I noticed was interesting was the phrasing of this. So according to this, they think that this is a huge statement that 5.12 million people worldwide want to see an end to the Chinese Communist Party. And by saying that, they're making it sound like, wow, 5.12 million people, that's a lot of people. That's like the majority of the world. Except it's not. And actually, I have this screenshot here that I'll put up here that I broke the math down for you. So let's look at this. So the world population, according to Worldmeter and the UN, is at 8.2 billion people. And the article says more than 5.12 million people worldwide want an end to the CCP. Well, the difference between that, so if 5.12 million people worldwide want an end to the CCP, what is the world population left who either is in favor of that? But in all honesty, the majority of that population probably isn't in favor of the CCP. The reality is that the majority of the population, most people really only spend a very small fraction of the day consuming news and media. Most people don't like to get involved in news and politics. They really consume very little of it. A lot of people the world over aren't really interested. They might be subtly aware of local politics or politics within their country, but really the majority of people the world over aren't really interested in politics, especially geopolitics or global politics or politics and economics that are occurring in other countries. So I would be willing to bet that the majority of that population is probably indifferent. They're not in favor of the CCP. They're not against the CCP. They probably know, the vast majority probably know nothing about it and don't really research or read about it at all and don't keep up with it because, quite honestly, like politics and economics and especially global ones from other countries is not very entertaining. It's very boring, and it's not something that a lot of people want to familiarize themselves with. But so that number is, so we have 8.2 billion minus 5.12 million. Well, that population that is either in favor or indifferent is 8,194,880,000. The percentage of the world population that 5.12 million is, so we take 5,120,000 divided by 8,200,000,000, which equals 0.0006243,902, which that means that 5.12 million is only 0.062% of the world's population. So only 0.062% of the world's population wants to see an end to the CCP. So what is the percentage of the population that is in favor or indifferent? Well, so we take the amount of the difference between the 8.2 billion and the 5.12 million, and we get that 8.194 billion number. So 8,194,880,000 divided by 8.2 billion that equals 0.9993756,098, which is 99.9% of the population. 99.9% of the world's population is either in favor of the CCP or most likely the vast majority indifferent. They probably know nothing about it and they don't care. Yeah. So knowing this in my head, because I found that interesting. In this article, they make it sound like that's a lot of people, and it does sound like a lot of people. But having done videos and stuff where I've had to look at populations, but populations of U.S. cities, populations of United States and Canada together versus the population of South America, population of Asia. That number seemed rather small in comparison to the global population, which, by the way, did increase since the last time I brought up the world population, which I think the last video I did where I brought up the world population because one of the talking points of right-wing people is to say that birth rate is in decline, the human population is in decline, and I keep saying the human population keeps going up by a factor of 1 billion every year. And the last time I did a video talking about the world population was 7 billion people. And I said, watch, next year it'll be 8 billion. Well, now it's 8.2 billion, working its way towards 9 billion. So, no, birth rates are not in decline. The population is not shrinking. It's growing exponentially. Again, the right wing seems to be more engaged with postmodernism than the left. They want to rewrite descriptive reality and live in a fantasy that isn't real. And you know, in their world, in their eye view, according to their worldview, the population has to be shrinking. But it's not. It's growing. It keeps growing. So after I realized this, like, that means 99.9% of the world's population mostly doesn't care, and or you know, some in favor of the CCP, and then it was only 0.062% of the world's population, and this, according to this article, wants to see the CCP dismantled. That's a lesser population than the gay population. Gay people make up 10% of the overall population. That's a smaller population than the people with my debilitating chronic pain condition, neurogenic thoracic outlet syndrome, which affects 1% of the overall population. That's a smaller population size than the amount of trans people in the world, which is 1% of the population. That's a really small population. That's basically if one country in the world came out and said, we think the CCP should be dismantled. Well, no, and the rest of the world is like, we don't care about the CCP. We don't care if that they can exist. It's fine. We don't care. That's 99.9% of the population. So I find that to be very misleading of this article. It's not lying, but it's making it sound like that's the majority, and it's not. It's actually a minority that's a smaller minority, a minority that's it's more of a minority than LGBTQIA plus people. It's more of a minority than people with my very rare chronic pain, debilitating chronic pain condition, which, by the way, because it's so rare, there are people in the medical field, doctors and stuff that I've ran into, that they know that it exists, but they don't know anything about NTOS. So that if that gives you an idea on how rare NTOS is, and this is a smaller population than that. That seems to me like they're doing a slant, a spin, a manipulative tactic to the reader to get the reader to think that the majority of the world wants to see the CCP dismantled, and that's not the case. That this is a statistical bias, is what it's called. That's it's manipulative. It's a statistical bias. They're playing around with numbers to screw with your head. You 5.12 million. That's a lot. That's got to be the majority of the world's population. Well, it's not. It's only 0.062%. So that made me wonder about the legitimacy of this news publication of the Epoch Times. So I went in and looked that up, looked at its fact and bias checks, and this is sort of what I found. Open Democracy Now!, the media giant that you've never heard of and why you should pay attention, an article written by them, suggests that the Epoch's Time is published in 21 languages in 33 countries and has a huge following amongst anti-vaxxers and far-right, and that's just for starters. Goes on to say that in January, German engineer, by name I can't pronounce, held an outdoor press conference in Vienna attended by Austrian and German alternatives, and talked about his claims that Austria had deliberately inflated the number of COVID-19 infections to justify a new lockdown compared to the government to a criminal organization. There's a ton of the typical criticisms of COVID. It goes on to say the Epoch Times is not backed by a government wishing to cause trouble for its rivals, unlike more notorious operations for many years. An obscure critic of China's Communist Party, the publication rose to prominence in the West through its full-throated backing of Donald Trump during the 2016 U.S. presidential elections, then began to spread conspiracy theories prevalent on the American right. But at times it has also appeared to be driven as much by the desire for clicks and influence as to put forward a particular view of the world. According to Ground News, the Epoch's Time media bias is lean right. Ground News assigned the score by aggregating media bias ratings of a lean right rating from Ad Fronts Media, a lean right rating from Media Bias and Fact Check, a lean right rating from All Sides. We've assigned a rating of high factuality to the Epoch Times. You can read more about how we've determined, so we don't have to really take Ground News's word for it, because we can go to factcheck.org and they have information about the Epoch Times, and this is Media Bias Fact Check, and they also say that it's mostly factual, not all the time, very right-leaning, and we also have All Sides, which also claims this is a culmination of different but Epoch Times, right-leaning, and a lot of the articles say that the Epoch Times has a very, very particular bias against the Chinese Communist Party in general. So after going through that, it seems to be a common trait that the Epoch Times is very right-leaning, and because they're very right-leaning, they tend to take a very hostile stance towards the CCP. And you can be objective and report facts that make the CCP look bad. I brought up things, criticisms I have of the CCP, and but it's not debatable that economically they're doing really well. and they're taking our place in some of the things that the Trump administration is actually helping them. Because like I said, a lot of these countries, they don't want to do deals with us anymore. We've proven to be an untrustworthy partner in global trade and commerce. So they're going to the CCP because they're willing to make reasonable trade agreements with product on the global stage, and the U.S. is not anymore. I don't know why you would do that. That doesn't make America great. From a capitalist right-wing view, that doesn't make America great. It actually hurts America. It makes us no longer an economic powerhouse. It's devaluing our currency. It's hurting our farmers. It's hurting our ranching industry. It's hurting our presence on the global stage for the resources that we can provide to other countries and make money and profit off of. We're being left out of that, and it's causing economic collapse here. So, no, that's not making America great. It's even from a right-wing perspective, it's damaging America. It's damaging it. From a left-wing perspective, you could argue that what Trump is doing is good because it's ending Western imperialism. However, it's coming at a cost of many, many human lives, and it hurts our ability to create things like social welfare systems and safety nets that I want so much for this country. I want the SSA for disability, SSI, retirement to work better. I want disability approval ratings to go up. They're at a historic low since we created the SSA on disability approval. And that's a different video to talk about what we're doing with the elderly and disabled in this country. But anyway, so there's lots of articles that was sent to me. On the other side of it, we have what is intelligence in the age of AI? We have that article. And another really big article that was sent to me as well is this one, which it's time to reverse course on marijuana legalization following, a very traditional right-wing conservative idea of prohibitions. They don't like prohibitions on guns or prohibitions on alcohol, but pretty much everything else should be illegal. I personally am for self-determinism. I think all drugs should be legal or decriminalized, like just flat out legal. Like I don't think that putting a molecular structure into your body is a criminal offense. And people who struggle with substance use disorders should be treated as a medical issue not a criminal one. Criminal activity should be treated with criminally, like theft, abuse. Those are crimes. But, somebody just doing drugs, if they're not stealing, if they're not hurting other people, that's their business, it's their choice. And if you remove the profit incentive, it looks very different. Because if you get rid of the profit incentive around drugs, then you have no more motivation to get more people addicted so that you can make more profit, more money. So if we get rid of the profit incentive, it looks very different when you go into a store and you can buy a very addictive substance as long as you're 21 years of age or older. That looks like a very different model. You want more and more people addicted to it so you can make more and more money. Versus somebody who's growing a plant to make a substance for their own personal use. There's no profit incentive. They have no incentive to get other people addicted because they're not going to make any kind of profit off of it. And they themselves know, this is really addictive. You don't want to go down this path. So there's nothing there to incentivize them to do that. And it retains to be a private use thing. So I'm not shocked that they want to get rid of marijuana. They want that to be illegal. It's just, punishment. Make everything illegal. Everything should be illegal. Yeah, party killers, buzz killers, fun killers. Just, stay at home, read your Bible, be a baby maker, consume less, work more. Just very boring. No real zest for life. The other thing that I noticed too in this is that this is from the opinion section of the article of the newspaper from the Epoch Times. And that really bothers me because it doesn't matter if the media you're consuming is left, right, center, whatever, which has no bearing on its factuality. It's actually the Epoch Times has been rated by these various fact checkers as being fairly factual, but the issue that a lot of them take is that they're very biased, and they have been non-factual and spreading anti-vaxxer, like misinformation about vaccines. But it really bothers me to think that anybody would be reading the opinions section where the columnists and journalists, are just writing opinion pieces and reading the opinion section as fact. I would hope nobody is doing that regardless of the political leaning of the newspaper, of the news vendor. Hopefully nobody does that. Yeah. So I found that interesting because I knew right away in reading that something was off because the numbers didn't make sense. And I didn't know the Epoch Times. I wasn't familiar with this newspaper before this conservative family member sent them to me. I wasn't aware of them. But I had a feeling that they were right-wing bias because those numbers weren't accurate. And then when I did research, I found out that that was corroborated by these fact checker, bias checker organizations, and they all the consensus agrees that it's a very right-wing bias paper. But more troubling still is the idea of people reading the opinions section of any news vendor, of any newspaper, and thinking that they're reading fact. It says opinions in the corner. I figured out that it was right-wing bias because, well, pretty much anything socialist, communist, anything, even if there are people that criticize China and say that they're not true communism, they have leftist stuff. I mean, there's various arguments and things, but it seems to be without question the right wing has to be oppositional to anything remotely leftist. I've met a lot of conservative right-wing traditional type people who think that authoritarianism is automatically socialist. Which is wild because, a lot of authoritarianism comes from far-right ideologies, and that's not to dismiss far-left authoritarianism. That does exist. And I think China would fall into that bracket, which is why I don't support it, is because it's leftist authoritarianism. I'm not a fan of authoritarianism. I'm a libertarian socialist. I'm an anarchist. I don't do the authoritarian. And some communists argue that authoritarian communism is not true communism. But it's inherent to the right. They have to hate anything that's labeled left, even if it's not left. They have to. And so I figured pretty quick, based on that weird little statistical fallacy, statistical bias fallacy that I saw there, that this was a right-leaning outlet. So I didn't look up the Epoch Times and go, oh, this is a right-wing bias publication. No, I read the article and said, this seems like a right-wing bias publication, and then looked it up and confirmed that it is. I guess this is a message about media literacy and postmodernism, that the right wing is participating in more postmodernist thinking than the left is in all actuality. And I find it concerning that people on the right are being fed this sort of level of bias and slant and yellow page media and misinformation, and many of them don't even want to be aware of that. That the family member who sent this to me is walking around thinking that the vast majority of the world's population wants to dismantle the CCP. And in all actuality, the vast majority of the world's population either doesn't care or is in favor of it, and is trying to get fact information about their world in the opinion section of a right-wing, conservatively biased newspaper. And that kind of bothers me. So it's distorting people's perception of reality. And it creates a bubble where people are not getting objective truths and facts, but more being fed confirmation bias towards a thing that isn't real and doesn't know. Chinese Communist Party is actually doing really, really well on the global stage. And if you really wanted to protect America in a right-wing sense, you would actually be against the Trump administration, because the things that he's doing are empowering Russia. They're empowering China. They're empowering BRICS, and kneecapping, like G7 is basically kicking America out at this point. We pretty much have no allies. We stand alone, and it's busting our economy and could make our currency completely irrelevant. So, if you're interested in capitalism and being a military powerhouse and being a domineering force on the world stage, Donald Trump isn't doing that. What he is doing is very far right-wing stuff, but I've heard this once. America is not a fascist country, but its government is being ran by fascists. These are fascist policies, and unfortunately, fascism has the tendency to break economies, completely cripple them, collapse them, and stuff. And there are countries that were occupied by fascist forces in World War II that are still recovering to this day economically because of what fascism did to that country's economics. So, yeah, I just wanted to make a video about that. I found this interesting, like how media works, news media. So, be careful, Look for fact, look for truth, not confirmation bias, not things that reinforce your worldview or your tribe or whatever, but fact. It's just, like I said, the economists are not in disagreement about this. China's doing really, really well, and America is making it do even better. Because a lot of the countries, like I said, they're going to China now instead of us, to the United States, which is crippling farmers and ranchers and all kinds of stuff. Yep. Well, that was my quick video about a newspaper article sent to me. Let me know what you think in the comments, and like, share, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, bell button, blah 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 blah, as if any of that matters for me. I'm unmonetized, so I can talk about and say whatever the fuck I want, because I don't have to answer to any sponsors. I don't have a Patreon. I'm not monetized, so I'm not held captive by that. And just on a personal note, I think every content creator should do everything they can to stop parasocial relationships from forming. The fact that the parasocial dynamic exists between YouTube creators and their audience is not a good thing. I think every content creator should try to wedge themselves off of parasocial relationships and not let them try their best not to allow them to even occur. Social media is very, very detrimental. Yeah, that's it, I guess. Like, share, subscribe, comment, bell button, all that, and out.